Hi everyone, we wanted to make a quick video about the recession. We're not wanting to be fear-mongering or anything like that, but obviously the world is happening and things are happening around us, and we've seen a bunch of marketing budgets get cut because we're both consultants and we see that. And also, unfortunately, people are being made redundant in marketing teams already. So we thought it'd be a good time to jump on and talk about this and kind of, I guess, cover what you should be doing, how you should be hopefully treating this and thinking, so that you come out in the best form possible, rather than throwing up your hands and stopping everything and basically marketing being thrown out the window.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons we wanted to talk through recession, as Ruth said, is it's not to fearmonger. Like having worked through a recession once already, I think once you've been through it once, you kind of understand the sort of reality of the situation, and it is serious and it does mean people will lose their jobs, but we genuinely want the best for the companies that we work with, and like all the marketers that we kind of work with, and we want to kind of talk about it in a logical way that is not about panicking, but it's about taking stock of the situation you're in right now and actually doing something that's meaningful so that you can continue to survive throughout what will be probably quite a rough time. I think it's also worth talking about quickly before we get into like our top tips. I think it's worth talking about the fact that we obviously have just come out the other end of a pandemic, first one for most of us who are alive today, and at the time of the pandemic, we quite literally were thinking, like, is everybody going to die?
Yeah.
Is our organization even going to survive? And I would have liked to have thought that from that, we've actually learned some really, really valuable lessons. And at least I think, Ruta and I definitely have from a marketing perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons we've got some really good stuff that we want to share. And also, as I said before, I worked through 2008, given I was basically a child at the time, but valuable life lessons that I now, when I think reflect now, many years later, are actually really important. And I know that actually there were quite a lot of companies that did really well out of 2008 because they continued to invest and grow. And again, I think our advice only comes from a place of sort of, having lived through some of this stuff, having been through rocky times at other companies, having supported brands that have had, challenging marketing situations before,
Moments.
whether that's, yeah, exactly. So we just want to cover all of that, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. It's also a particularly nerdy subject for me because I studied economics, so we can get into some technical stuff, but we won't, don't worry. And also there is, there's a small silver lining, always, as with these things. Somebody always makes money in the recession, and that's because it's a time where you can really focus on building stuff. You have to be clever about how you spend money. You have to be clever about making sure, especially for funded companies, that you don't run out of runway. But it's a time where you can spend doing things that you weren't necessarily able to do in a fast growing market situation. So there is an opportunity here to do something special that other companies are not able to do, or you wouldn't have been able to do yourself anyway, because of just how the market was. So it's not all doom and gloom as much as it might feel like it is. We promise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are silver linings in some of this, and I think we can dig into some of that as we kind of talk through some of the things. So we've kind of got our 5 top tips for recession marketing. I think the first one that's super, super important is to take stock of the performance of your marketing at the moment. So start reviewing the channels that you're using, what's performing, what's potentially not performing as well. And that's not to say that you need to cut things that aren't performing, but because you obviously always need to look at this in the round and understand that, you switch off one thing, you might have a knock-on effect over there somewhere else. But just to make sure that you understand your marketing performance as a whole. So as a team, if you are asked, if you are questioned, if you need to defend your budget, you actually know how you're performing, what your ROI is, and where you can potentially make room for improvement.
Agreed. And yeah, just to echo Emma's point, make sure you look at it quite holistically. Don't chop stuff without thinking about what other things it will affect, because oftentimes it does. But there's definitely savings to be made. And even within the channels themselves, if we're looking at, I don't know, events or PPC or things you might sponsor, have a look at within that channel, what specific things are working and what you should be spending more money on and focusing your budget on. And then the things that aren't working, you can cut those out, but you still have those channels working for you, just you're spending the budget in the right place, hopefully. The second point is kind of leading on from what I just said, and it's making sure you spend the budget that you have well. So in general, even if you get to keep your budget, whilst most likely most of us will get our budget cut to a certain extent, I would say use the 80-20 rule in the marketing way, I guess. So I would use 80% of your budget on things that you know work and in channels and activities that are performing for you already, and then keep another 20% of your budget to experiment with. Now, that might seem counterintuitive in a recession because you just want to buckle down and do what you know works. But because there's a recession and because your buying market will probably be changing, you're going to have to try some new stuff to make sure that you can attract the buyers the same way that you did. So don't underestimate that need for still room to experiment and to try new things, because chances are you'll be doing more new things now than you ever have before, because you're just having to keep up with your targets and make sure that you're spending your budget well. So use the 80-20 rule and make sure you're spending your budget on the things that are working for you with a little left over for experiments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to the COVID stuff, I think that was something that we learned during COVID, is that you need to experiment with stuff that you haven't tried before, or that you didn't think was even maybe possible. For example, when we worked at Clear Review, we launched an academy, so a community, and we also did like a back-to-back online webinar campaign that we were just like, why are we doing this to ourselves? But the point is it worked, and it will come feedback into another point that we're going to make later on about, how you interact with your audience during these times. And I think just giving yourself that opportunity. The other thing that pops up during these times is other new channels, right? So like TikTok, for example, not saying everybody should get on TikTok, okay? But that channel all of a sudden emerged as if from nowhere. And if you wanted to invest in it, but you've cut your budget right back to the bare bones where you have no room to experiment, but actually all of a sudden, people are consuming loads of content there, you've got no room for experimentation. So I think just bear that in mind. 80-20, very sensible rule and very easily explained, I think, to anyone who is responsible for a budget. The next tip we have, and this is sort of one that I think lots of people maybe either think they do, or they are like, oh, we don't have the resource to do this, but I'm incredibly passionate about it for obvious reasons, is to work with your advocates. There are a few of those where they might have been written in capital letters on our notes. It's like, you need to do this. You will have advocates unless your product is terrible and you have terrible customer service.
There'll still be someone that loves it.
There'll still be someone that loves it. And the thing is, advocates convert people into customers quicker than anything you can do from a sort of like straight marketing or sales perspective. Yeah. So if you were all of a sudden thinking we need to up our outbound sales, that is categorically, in most cases for B2B SaaS, a mistake. It's very hard to sell technology through just picking up the phone or sending emails out. But if you work with your advocates and you co-create really amazing content, this stuff doesn't have to cost the earth, the moon, and the sun, and they are publicly advocating for your brand, for your product, for the service that you provide. That is a game changer, because it's not the same as just like churning out case studies or asking everybody for a G2 review. I'm talking about actually doing meaningful content together that talks about the pain points that your customers have, that showcases your brand to be reliable, trustworthy, and something that's worth investing in right now while they themselves are going through difficulty. So I would absolutely do that. I also think within that advocacy piece, there's a line for customer marketing as well, if you don't do any, because ultimately one of the things you're going to need to do is you're going to need to retain your current client base. And customer marketing 100% allows you to, supports you doing that along with your customer success function. The other thing is it's an avenue to explore new revenue that you potentially haven't properly looked at before. So that's like your upsell and your cross-sell. If you've got multiple products that you can sell into your customer base, that is a really solid opportunity to help expand your ARR. So like, do it. Don't sit there and go, oh yeah, but like it's really hard to link that back to marketing budget and marketing spend, and advocacy takes loads of effort. The truth is, yes, it does, because it's relationship building, but you will absolutely feel the benefit of bringing your customers in closer to you. It's beautiful when it happens.
I think that's one of the points of sometimes you don't have the time to do things when you're moving so fast. I think leaning into advocacy is something that is the perfect thing to do right now, when there will be less demand, there will be less need for you to do things, in terms of maybe putting out huge campaigns or that kind of stuff, because you won't have as much money to spend, right? So the work usually kind of decreases in that sense. Not saying that marketers aren't super busy and probably being asked to do 2 or 3 jobs at a time, but if you haven't had the opportunity to get really close to customer success, if you work in a SaaS company, and make sure that you are enabling them and helping them get the renewals and the upsells, this is the perfect time to do it. Like you'll have no better opportunity basically than now. The next point is one that both Emma and I harp on about, you're probably bored of hearing, is track performance carefully, and make sure that you know your numbers. The more frequently you track your performance, the more frequently you look at ROI and at the performance of each channel, and especially at conversion rates and conversion rates of channels, the quicker you can pivot and you can stop spending where you shouldn't be and change that to something you should be spending the money on. But also you always then have a story when someone's asking you, why are you doing this, or how is this doing? You always have a way to explain that, which is so important to protect yourselves and to preserve yourselves in a company right now, because there'll be a lot of questions about basically everything you do, more than probably any other team probably gets. So just tracking your performance. If you don't have your metrics in order, please get your metrics in order. We have a template that we can share with you to do that. If you have all of those, that's your base. You should be okay, but please get your metrics and tracking in order. If you don't have that in order right now, it's going to be a hard time.
Yeah, you've got to demonstrate that how stuff's working, even when stuff's slowed down or there's less money to spend, because there will be good times again. And if you do not know your numbers when the good times come back round, marketing will still not get any budget.
Yeah, 100%.
So we've got to get it sorted. It also allows you like that opportunity to like adjust your plans. So like if you can see
reforecasting, all the time, constantly reforecast, constantly recheck, constantly, right? Like it's the only way to do it.
And our final point, and I think this is one that we could talk about this for an hour straight if we wanted to, is be generous with your marketing content. In particular, now is not the time to create loads of valuable content and stick it behind a gate, because that is not helpful for anybody. Yes, it might get you some extra leads, but if you're measuring lead volumes alone, like something's not working anyway.
We're already in a pickle.
We're already in a pickle. So be generous, give out resources, create useful content, help your customers or future customers. They like, if you are going through a hard time, like just imagine the terrible time your customers are going through, because some of those businesses are not recession proof. especially if you work in B2B SaaS or B2B, business services. Your business is potentially more recession proof than others just by nature of the stuff that you do. Whereas some of your other clients, absolutely, this could end their business. So if you are not shown to be helpful and offer resources to those people, you are not going to be thought of as one of their top vendors. Like, I think it's always really important to remember where you fit into the grand scheme of things for your customers. Is that, I think in reality, I think on average, doesn't matter who you are, where you work, but you'll have let's say you've got 10 to 20 vendors of different technology, different services. And within each one of those businesses, I think you only ever have 3 really trusted vendors that you really are like, I love these guys, they can do no wrong. That's obviously where you generate your advocacy from as well. But you need to get into that top 3 slot. If you're not there now, and you're sort of thought as the sort of oh God, they're calling me again, they want to talk about stuff again, you need to fix that. And that is obviously, that's customer success's responsibility, but it's also something that marketing can support as well by generously creating content that is useful and resourceful.
Yeah, I think that's something that we definitely learned during COVID. Just so you know, we used to sell to HR people. That was our main buyer persona. And you can only imagine when COVID hit, just the kind of stress that HR was under with furloughs, having people to work from home, having to completely change how people communicate and how they do their work. That's all on the HR team's head, right? So our only goal was to be as useful as we physically could be to them with no expectation of anything back. So our go-to were, creating huge templates for COVID check, not COVID checks, that sounds weird, it's a health check, but a health check into coming out of COVID, into how you're doing now, into the things you should be looking at, templates about enabling people to have better conversations, all of that stuff. And I dare I say we did quite well. Our budget got cut by half, but we still made revenue. We still were around a positive ROI. And then when kind of COVID tapered off, we were in a really phenomenal place to grow again. And it was hard. Every week, basically, we were like, how can we help HR people? But it was so worth it at the end, right?
And I think that's the starting point. I think even if you do nothing else that we've just suggested, think of your audience and ask yourself, how can I help them? And not just marketing, sit down with customer success, sit down with product, even sales to a certain extent, sit down and have that conversation where you're like, how can we actually be helpful right now to our clients?
Yeah.
Who are our audience? What are they going through right now? Ask yourself that, especially if it's HR, for us, right now, it's HR who are having to make redundancies. Not a good time. So, just think about that no matter what. Even if you're making MarTech and you're thinking, oh my God, all of our marketing people are having their budgets cut and possibly being made redundant, how can your business support those people through that?
Yeah,
because there will be something that you can do. So yeah, that's the final point, and I think probably the most important.
Just try and leave a good taste in people's mouth.
Yeah, I mean, just a sort of final maybe summary point for both of us potentially is, also remember that out of COVID, because I think it's the most recent one, because it's not that 2008, but different recession, we live in a different world. The digital world has transformed, it's changed since then. So I think we have to take that into consideration as well when we're talking about recessions. But COVID, not that long ago, and there were businesses literally hauled over the coals for the way that they behaved during COVID. No business is untouchable.
Yeah, agreed.
So just be nice and helpful.
Yeah. Be nice and helpful, and be smart about what you're spending your money on, and make sure you protect yourself as a marketer, know your numbers, and you should be in reasonable shape. And if not, you get a new job, and that's fine, but you can do all those things at the next job. These are things that you should be doing anyway, right? So yeah, I hope you will find this useful.